Armed Forces, former Joint Operational Commander, quite the title, is with us now. Ash Alexander Cooper, good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. So we've heard that there will be an evacuation of Brits. The Brits are coming, as we were saying earlier. It's a 48, 72-hour ceasefire. What happens next?
Well, it's clearly very welcome news for those who've been waiting for some sort of communication about what the plan would be, and obviously their families who are worried and waiting for news as well for what might be happening. It's a really complex time and very, very unstable. So even though we have very welcome news also that there's this ceasefire potentially for up to 72 hours, you know, the history of the last 10 days shows that there's no guarantee that the fighting won't continue. So it remains very unpredictable. But it's good news to hear that the British have now moved more sort of actively, and an evacuation appears to be starting. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out.
How do we do it? What happens?
Well, the trouble is this country is so large that there are no really good options. I mean, there's talk of Port Sudan being potentially used with naval vessels to extract people from the sea, but that's still 525 miles away from Khartoum. So that's a pretty difficult journey for anybody who's trying to make it that far. Air clearly is the fastest way out, but the capacity on helicopters or aeroplanes is more limited. So land would be the way to get the most people out most quickly if this window is really small. But clearly that's quite dangerous if you get caught up in checkpoints or the message hasn't filtered down to the most junior commanders that there is a ceasefire, because that is always the risk in these kind of
I was going to say, how do you trust the ceasefire?
Well, this is exactly it. You know, at the highest level, if the commanders have agreed one thing, that's great. But if, as we understand, communication is pretty difficult in country right now, there's no guarantee that the junior commanders will have heard that, or they're trying to make a name for themselves. So the risk to life is still very high, and therefore it's a risk calculus, not just for those on the ground, but for the British government and the Prime Minister to determine which option is the best one to achieve the outcome that they seek.
It's only a 72-hour window at most, though, so I'm guessing a lot of preparation has already been done.
Yeah, the military team at Permanent Joint Headquarters here in London, this is really why they exist, to manage operations overseas. They will have been conducting contingency planning for weeks, if not months, to work up every available and potential option that might work. So it's really going to be them presenting this to the government to determine what is within the risk appetite of the government and which is most likely to achieve the aim. But it's a really small window. Even if it does hold for 72 hours, there's still 4,000 people that need to be got out. That's going to take time. And there's still a risk. You know, if we've learned one thing from Afghanistan and that withdrawal, although the situations are different, is that every minute and every hour counts. We can't be complacent and hope that the ceasefire lasts longer than 72 hours. We must plan that every hour is our last and do everything we can.
The reason I ask you, sir, is because, of course, you were Britain's permanent joint. You worked in Britain's permanent joint headquarters, the hub of the UK planning for overseas military operations. So you know exactly what needs to be done to get as many people out as possible. Can we get 4,000 people out that are spread across this country in 72 hours?
Well, that is the challenge. That's the nub of the issue. But this is not solely a British effort. You know, we work very closely in partnership with our allies, the US and others, who have a bigger presence in the region. So I would imagine that there's a lot of coordination going on between the Brits and all those other countries in the EU, the US and elsewhere, to ensure that if there's capacity or options to help get people out if there's space, then we'll be working very much hand in glove with them.
Is it doable?
I believe it is doable, but it's going to take a lot of will from the government to actually, coordinate itself and communicate clearly. I think the biggest risk, apart from the distance and the other things we've already talked about, is communication. You know, if people don't get the message, and that certainly happened in Afghanistan, people didn't receive the email or the text message in time to get to the evacuation point. And then there is a risk clearly that people might be left behind. And then if the situation deteriorated further, then I don't know what they would do.
But how do you get the message to people on the ground who potentially don't have any electricity, don't have any other form of communication with the outside world?
Yeah, that is the problem. I mean, I believe there is still text messaging, but the communication is, I read somewhere today that it's down to 2% of what would be normal ways and means to communicate. So that is going to be very, very hard, which is why the government must be extremely explicit and clear with simple instructions for those who have been to this point been told to shelter in place and not go outside. They will need to know very clearly what to do, because they'll be panicked, scared, and there's still a huge risk of, once they've left their apartment, that they'll bump into roadblocks or young fighters that haven't got the message that fighting is over for now.
Yeah, I mean, people hiding under the bed.
Yeah.
And they need to know that they need to leave everything now and go to either the port or the airport, and that's the only way to get out of the country. We have viewers who are watching us who have people still in Sudan, family and friends. If they do manage to communicate with them, what should they be saying?
Well, I mean, one would hope that the government's plan will let them know, depending on where they are.
But if not?
It's a difficult one because, you know, the moment you leave your building or your house, there is a huge increase to risk to life. But if you stay and fighting does resume, or you know, the fighting continues around your house, then that's also equally a risk, particularly if you're running out of water, food or medicine, if people need medicine. So there are no good options here, really. But it's encouraging, as I said at the start, that an evacuation appears to be underway, and the government has moved faster than perhaps some were expecting, albeit, you know, reports that they are slightly behind some of their European partners. But communication will be key, and speed is of the essence now.
Let me just finish that point, and then I'll come on to what you were just saying. What would you say to your loved ones if they were trapped in Sudan at the moment?
If I had family there, if I was there myself, if I had a window of opportunity that I thought was safe enough based on my risk calculus, then I would try and get to somewhere where I believed that I'd be safer and further away from the fighting, and then work out how to get to the port or an airport from there. But you know,
and how would you assess your risk?
Well, I've had military training, and you know, I've been in these hostile environments for many years in my life, so I know maybe my risk appetite is higher. But it's just absorbing anything you can in terms of news and updates, and trying to work out with local partners as well. I mean, all these people who are living in Sudan or have been posted to work there will likely have local networks, and that kind of information could be absolutely valuable for them in terms of understanding what might be safe enough to be able to get to a place that would allow them to be extracted.
Yeah, I mean, my team in my ear is saying, you know, how absolutely fascinating it is. And of course, you know the challenges because you've been in that position. But what about people who don't know the risks?
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying. You know, if you are in your apartment hiding under your bed, as you said, and you're running out of water and you're running out of food, and you can hear gunfire outside your house, it is traumatising. And I think that's another thing that the government must start already to be thinking about, is that even when we do extract these people safely, that what services are we going to be able to provide them for the children who may be traumatised, having seen fighting or been wrapped up in it themselves. They may have been wounded or had family members hurt, or seen other of their friends killed or wounded. So that is another issue that needs to be thought about now and not wait.
And I wondered if I might just be able to pick up on the point that you're making about the fact that other countries have brought out nationals before we have. And in fact, the French, I think, have brought out British nationals, dual nationals. Did we act quickly enough?
It would appear that we acted faster than certainly I was expecting us to act. But all these things are never simple or tidy. They're always complex and unpredictable and messy. That's just the reality on the ground. But I can safely say, hand on heart, that all of those military folks who are involved in the planning and the execution of these extractions will have been doing the planning for many weeks, if not months, and they will be doing everything they can on the ground and accept that the risk to life is very real, and they'll do anything they can to protect that life and get people out.
OK, it's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Much appreciated. Thank you.